Hello guys, welcome back to the channel, and as the title suggests, in this video I'm going to be showing you how I use various techniques with the brush, the hairy stick, to achieve sort of colour modulation, fading, shading on armour without the use of an airbrush. So yeah, this idea came about a few weeks ago when I was building something live over 48 hours, which was the Achilles from Tamir in 48th. And I didn't want to be going away from the live stream into the spray booth all the time. So I kind of came up with this system, if you like, where I was going to try and use the brush to achieve the end result. And it worked, and it generated some interest. So that's why I'm doing this video. I'm not saying this is the way it should be done. It's not perfect by any stretch. It's just the way I did the Achilles. And it's something I'll use in the future as well, definitely. Particularly on Warhammer stuff and gaming pieces, rather than going to my default setting, which is the airbrush. It's another tool in the toolbox that I can use if required. And hopefully you guys will watch the video and either say, no, that's crap, I don't like it, I'm going to stick to the airbrush, or actually, yeah, I could try that and maybe use it, or certainly use some of it. That's it. I'll stop waffling. Let's go down to the bench and let's get painting. Right, guys, so here we are down at the bench. And the first thing we're going to look at is essentially the whole reason behind why I'm making this video. So in front of you, what you can see is the Tamiya 48 scale Achilles tank destroyer. Now I built this a few weeks ago on the Model Officers Mess 48-hour birthday bash live stream, and I did it all with the brush. I didn't use an airbrush at all with this, which generated a bit of interest. How I managed to achieve this sort of tonal variation on the green, etc. So following several requests, I decided to do a video showing how I did it, basically. So that was the reason why. So that was the Achilles. Now, what I've done is I've got some old Rhino, Space Marine Warhammer Rhino sprues. So I've done the same techniques on this bit here, which is one of the side panels. And as you can see, the kind of tonal variation, there's no detail painting obviously on this. That tonal variation in the green is what we're trying to achieve. So I propose to show you how I did it. Now, I'm not saying that this is how it should be done. This is just how I did it. And obviously, once on that, we start to add weathering and all that sort of stuff, we'll end up with something like the Achilles. I'm not going to show you the weathering and stuff in this video. That's done to death. But that's essentially what I'm going to show is how to get this foundation green with some tonal variation, some highlights, some shadows, so that then you can move on to the various other stages, all without the need for an airbrush, is essentially what it's all about. So what we have here is a unpainted Rhino side panel, which we'll be using to I'll be using to demonstrate on this video how I'm going to do the green. So all I've done is mounted that with a bit of white tack on some card, which just means I can move it around, I can handle it without the need to actually touch it itself, to touch the panel itself or the model. So what we're going to do is I'm going to rattle can primer it in Citadel coloured Death Guard green. So again, we don't need an airbrush to primer it, and that will give us a good green colour to work from as a foundation. The other paints that I'm going to be using, so first one is again Citadel, and it is Deathworld Forest. So that's going to be our base colour for this stuff. Then we're going to use Death Guard green as a brush paint rather than a rattle can. We're going to use two shades or two washes. First one is Norn Oil, second one Agrax Earth Shade. And then we're going to use some Tamiya panel line accent color, dark brown. Rather than black, we're going to use dark brown, which is going to allow us to do a pin wash and that sort of stuff. The brushes I'm going to be using, there are 3. So first one, and I guess the main one really, is going to be the Artis Opus Series D large dry brush. So these are very soft, very chunky, and ideal for this sort of technique. These aren't cheap, they are quite expensive. There are alternatives out there. Army Painter do some cheaper, etc. So that's what I'm going to be using. I'm also going to be using a Citadel Color synthetic large shade brush. So this is a nice flathead soft brush, so we're going to use that. And we're going to be using a normal Citadel brush, which is their medium dry brush. And that's it. So we're going to use 3 brushes, essentially, what, 5, 6 products to turn this into this, which eventually, once you use all the other techniques, can look something like this. So that's what we're going to do. Right then, I'm going to go and get this primed, let it dry for 30-45 minutes, and then we're going to come back and we're going to start to do some of the bits to it, and hopefully it'll work. So I'll see you in a bit. Right guys, so primer's on. It's just been rattle canned on in the Death Guard green. That's nice and dry now. So what we're going to do is put our base colour on. So we're going to be using Death World Forest in my wet palette. So wet palette is nice and moist. So we're going to add 2 good sized brushfuls of paint into the wet palette, and it will start to thin it, mixing it with just water, no special thinners or anything like that. So then what the brush we're going to use is we're going to use our Citadel large shade brush, which is ideal for this. I like using this brush for just getting that good base coat. So we start to mix it, make sure it's nice and thin. You don't want your paint too thick. And then all we're going to do is start to paint that on. Try and keep your brush, there will be areas like the top of the door there where you can't, but try and keep your brush moving in the same direction and get all of these panels with a nice smooth coat. It massively helps that our primer colour is green, because it's a good foundation colour for this. So I always try, if possible, when brush painting, to try and use a primer colour that is the same colour as what I'm painting, if that makes sense. So in this case we're using greens, so we want the foundation colour, if possible, to be green. And that's it. So nice thin coat of paint. It may need a second coat, we'll have a look once it's done. But essentially we're just painting that on, trying to avoid any brush strokes. Nice smooth coat of paint. That's it, simple as that. I'm not going to bother with the wheels, not for the purposes of this. So yeah, there we go. I'm happy with that. That will dry in sort of 10-15 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So that's it. Clean your brush and wait for that to dry. Okay folks, so the Death World Forest is dry now. We can see we have got a little bit of patchiness, little few brush strokes here and there. We're not going to worry about that at this stage. So the next stage we're going to do is we're going to use the Norn Oil and the Agrax Earthshade. And the way we're going to do this is essentially we're going to take just a normal brush, an old brush, to get this stuff out. So rather than using a wet palette, I'm just using an old milk bottle top. because I don't really want to dilute this paint or this wash too much. So we're going to go 2 parts Lawn Oil. So 2 brushfuls of Lawn Oil to start with 1 part Airbrush shade, which is more of a dark browny type colour. So 1 part of Airbrush shade, and then we're just going to mix those as best we can. Get rid of that brush, and then again we're going to use our large shade brush, and we're just going to put it all over. Is essentially what we're going to do. So make sure you've got plenty on your brush, and we're just going to start to paint this on. Now here we want to make sure, you don't want pooling, but what we want to make sure is it is in these recesses on the armor panel. And we're just going to go all the way over. Again, try and keep your brush moving in the same direction. I think we're going to need a little bit more. So we'll go with Lawn Oil again, with an old brush, and just do that. And a little bit of Airbrush shade. Do that, mix them up. And then again, we're just going to start applying this. You will have to go in different directions around some of the detail bits, obviously, just to get it in there. But in the main, try and keep your brush moving in the same direction to avoid any major issues later on with brush marks, etc. Just make sure we've got a good coverage, and then that will dry again 15-20 minutes probably. Just make sure we've got everywhere that we want to cover. Nice smooth finish. So here you can see in the rear panel here, we need a little bit more in there. So we can go in, just paint it around the edges. Let it start to pull a bit in that panel line, and then downward motions around it. And hopefully, once we're dry, we'll have the effect we're after. And there we go. So it will give you this shiny, glossy finish initially, but that will matte out to more of a satin as it starts to dry. And then we'll come back and we'll actually start with the highlights and the dry brushing effects then, and hopefully we'll achieve something passable, reasonable, without an airbrush. So I'll come back. Okay, so the wash shade, whatever you want to call it, is now dried, and we've got this dirty, grimy appearance. You can see there in the recesses we've got that sort of accumulating in the corners and the bottom, which is kind of what we want at this stage. So now we're going to start with some dry brushing. So first colour we're going to use is the colour that we've just covered up. So we're going to go back to Death World Forest. So we'll get a bit of kitchen paper, nothing special about that at all. And what we're going to do is we're going to get some of this onto our dry brush, but then we're going to take the majority of it off, and we're just going to start working that colour all over the model. So we're removing the majority of it. We don't want loads on. It's much easier to put more on than to take it off. So we'll start with the raised smokestacks, or whatever they're called. And just in circular motions, just starting to put that colour back onto these panels. But what it will do is it will leave the wash, the shade, in the recessed areas. That's kind of what we want to do. So we're going all over in circular motions and trying to create a smooth finish. Now you want to make sure, although you don't want loads of paint on your brush, you don't want to leave it till there's no paint on the brush, because potentially you're going to start scratching the surface of the paint and the stuff you've already put on there, which you don't want, because that will affect it and not leave a very nice finish. So the camera's wobbling as I'm taking this paint off the brush. I'm going to take that off its cardboard mount now, so I can really start to work that paint into the panels. Until we get a nice smooth finish, concentrating more on the center of the panels at this stage, because the edges we're going to do later. And so we're getting this smooth finish now, but we're still leaving that grimy sort of finish in the recesses, which is exactly what we want. So we're not going to clean the brush now, because we want that transition. So now we're going to go to the Death Guard green. So we're going to get that Death Guard green onto the brush, and we're going to start to take it off exactly the same way, making sure that all of the bristles of the brush are nice and covered. You can test it on the back of your hand, and we're happy. So now we're going to start from the center of the panel. So we'll start right in the middle, circular motion, and we're just going to start moving out now. Just be aware that if you're using kitchen paper for this rather than a proper sort of wooden palette, which you can get, you may get some debris, some fibers, etc. accumulating, and you just brush those off before they set into the paint. But yeah, so we'll start taking those off, and we should start to see that it's getting lighter in the center, which is exactly what we're after. Start to move around the model, edges, center of the panels, but it will still leave the darker colors in the recess, which is exactly what we need. So this is a very similar technique that you would do with an airbrush, where you come in and you highlight the center of the panels, but this way you don't need that airbrush. So there we go. That's where we want to be at this stage. All right, super. Then we're now going to use our accent color. So make sure you give these a good shake, because it does settle at the bottom. And what we want to do is essentially we want to do a pin wash, which means that we're just going to go around the edges of things like the rivet detail, the recess lines, very gently. As I say, it's easier to put more on than take it off, and this will start to create shade. So don't worry about the excess at this stage, because we're going to sort that out. There's no clear coat on this at all. You see me do it here and now. So we just want to put in that dark brown rather than black. Dark brown I find on green gives a bit more of a subtle effect. Black can be too stark. We'll just go around to start with this rear panel. There's going to be very little capillary action as such because of no clear coat. We're going straight onto the acrylic paint. If you get a bit extra on, it's not a problem. A little bit of kitchen roll and just wipe it while it's wet. Dab it away. So everything is fixable. And it is difficult for me, I know some people are very good at it, but it is difficult for me to do this on camera and try and show you what I'm doing. So yeah, we're just going to go all the way around the model. But bear in mind, as I said, capillary action isn't going to be great just because there's no clear coat on it. I mean, you could put a clear coat on it if you want. I generally don't. I very rarely use clear coats now because I find it can detract from the paint effects that you've achieved. So I very rarely use a clear coat now, unless I really need to. If I'm putting a lot of decals on something, then I will. But generally, I try not to. So we're getting that dirty brown effect now, which is what we want. Around all these rivets. If you've got a bit too much on, you can use the brush. It will allow you to take a bit off. So it looks quite, or can appear quite messy at this stage, but that's okay. So what we're going to do is go around the edge of the door there, all the way around, just working it into the gaps that are actually there, if that makes sense. These, you know, we're not manufacturing these gaps or trying to create the illusion they are there. So we'll use those to our advantage. And as I said, don't worry if you've got a little bit too much on or you've smudged it or whatever, because everything is fixable. So we just dab it with the kitchen paper, or kitchen towel, or whatever you want to call it. Varies depending where you are in the world. And we're starting to get this brown appearance now. So I'm going to go around the rest of the model, make sure it's all done, nice and tidy, and then I'll come back and show you the next stage. Right guys, so as we can see now, that panel line accent is dried. We've still got a bit of a smudge areas and all that sort of stuff, but I'm not too worried about that at this stage. So now we're going to move on to another dry brush, but this time we're going to be using the Citadel medium dry brush. And the reason we've swapped brushes is now we want to start to be a little bit more focused. So we're using the Death Guard green again. Get it off. And then what we're going to do is we're going to focus in circular motions right in the center of the panels now. We don't want to be going right up to the edges because we want to start to really create that sort of tonal variation where the center of the panel is lighter. So that's what we're going to do. And the reason we're using this brush is because we've got a bit more control over where we start to put these highlights in. So you can see there in the center of the panel now, we're really starting to get that highlighted green color to create that tonal variation, which is what it's all about. I mean, an airbrush, yes, if you've got one and you're fairly competent with it, does this effect as well. But there are lots of people out there that either don't have an airbrush or don't have the confidence with it. Now I would be an advocate and say the only way to get confident with it is to use it, but for the reasons I mentioned, I decided to do the Achilles with a brush. It generated some interest from people that airbrush their models, so I thought, well, let's do a quick video and show how I do it. I can't claim that I'm the first person to think of this, you know, certainly in the wargaming world where airbrushing isn't as popular. This has been something that's been used for years, and there are people out there way better at it than me, and this is just what I've picked up along the way, so I thought I would share. So we're just concentrating in the center of the panels now, just to get rid of that smudging from the panel line wash and really start to create that variation now, which I think we're doing quite nicely. So that's that. Here we go. Oops. So yeah, we're starting now to create that tonal variation in the green, and the final stage really is where we're going to get the Death Guard green, very little of it, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to pick out the edges. So we're not concentrating on the panels, we're literally going around the model, and any pronounced edges, we're just hitting them with the Death Guard green just to make them pop. Now, obviously this is just the base, it's just the foundation of how we're getting this colour onto the model with some highlights and shadows. The next sort of stages would be, as with any build really, sort of weathering, highlighting, rivets, you know, all that sort of stuff, filters. This is literally just picking out the detail, the edges, putting a nice base colour down without an airbrush to assist the later stages really. I mean, if people are interested in how I would weather this sort of colour or whatever, it's something maybe I can look at to do a video. Again, try not, well, I won't be using the airbrush, to try and show you how I did it on the Achilles, because obviously that is weathered. It's not particularly chipped, they didn't chip all that much, but we can certainly put some chipping on this. And there we go, so we're done, and that's it. It's as simple as that really. We've got that, I think that's a hair or something. I would sort that out if it, you know, if this was something that I was going to be putting together, then I would sort that out. But there we go, so that's your basic foundation for everything else you're going to do now. So again, there we've got the other side, you know, so we've got that basic foundation. If we were going to start to add weathering and dust effects and chipping and all that stuff, we've got a good foundation now to start working on. And then eventually, with all those processes done, we'd end up with something like this. So you can see there the scratches, the edges are highlighted with dust effects. There's a bit of dirt and grime on the wheels, etc. So that's, you know, what we would achieve if we continued with this. But for now, for the purposes of this video and just showing you how to get your base colour on with various tones and stuff without using an airbrush, I think we're there. So yeah, it's a very simple way of doing it. It takes really no time at all, and yeah, it's done. So There we go. There's the two sides of the rhino. This rhino eventually is going to be stripped, repainted, with the idea of doing a Berlin camo scheme on the rhino. Thanks to Mr. Malcolm Charles for that idea. But yeah, so this is just some bits I had lying around. I thought they'd lend themselves well to showing this technique. With some large surface area in the panels, but also some raised detail, so that's why we chose it. And hopefully we've achieved what we set out to achieve. I'm fairly happy with the result, and hopefully you guys are too. So I shall go back face the camera, say my goodbyes, and yeah, that's it. I'll see you in a minute. So there we go. That's how I did it. That's how I did the Achilles. We've now got the two bits of rhino. I may, depending on what interest is shown, show you how I would weather this and add some chipping and a few dirt marks and all that stuff before I strip them, and put the whole thing together, and then do the idea that Malcolm Charles came up with to do a Berlin camo scheme rhino. I've got a little twist that I'm going to put on that, I think. But I'll leave that for the time being. I've got plenty of other stuff to be getting on with. So yeah, I'll leave that and see if there's enough interest generated to show some weathering and stuff on it. We shall see. We shall see. That's down to you guys. But yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you learned something, or learned that you don't want to do it this way. Or it's something you wouldn't use. But if it's something you would use, particularly if you haven't got an airbrush, then yeah, have a go at it. You know, find an old bit of model or whatever, and just have a go and practice and see if you like it, see if you like the effect. I do, and it's something I'll definitely be using more and more in the future. This kind of technique without, as I say, going to the airbrush all the time. But yeah, anyway, so until next time, guys, stay safe, happy hobbying, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.